Given the craziness within the bowels of today's world, sometimes ignorance really can be bliss. We live in a time where trouble is stalking us around every corner, and the last thing we need to do is to go looking for more of it. However, sometimes looking into the darkness to see the truth behind a situation is not only necessary, but it's needed to make us grow as human beings. And sometimes, in the mystery, you find something unexpected. Cathy Rain makes its way to Steam, GOG, the Humble Store, and various online retail outlets on May 5th for $14.99. The game follows in the footsteps of modern-day point-and-click adventure games, such as Technobabylon, but goes the mystery route with drama, intrigue, and a splash of humor thrown in there for good measure. Can Cathy and her Catmobile, yes, it's called the Catmobile, ride its storyline into your wallet? Or will it stall along the way as it struggles to get over the bumps of the open road? That's what I'm here to find out, but before I begin, this key was obtained from the publisher for review purposes. That won't change my opinion of the game in the end, but you should know that because of FTC guidelines, as well as the whole morals thing, you know? Let's start with the story. You play as the title character Cathy Rain, a second-year journalism student who finds out that her grandfather has recently passed away. Being estranged from her family for a while now, she goes back to pay her respects and finds that not all is right in the town. Her grandfather wasn't himself before he left this mortal coil, and Cathy wants to find out exactly what the story behind it was, like a good journalist should. And thus, the point-and-click adventure begins. Writing-wise, the game is good overall, with some standout moments along the way. There's a mixture of humor and drama that you'd expect from a mystery genre game. Some of the humor in particular does fall flat, especially early on. But given the humor they were going for at times, I wonder if it was purposeful to set up later segments. The intrigue portion of the plot is good as well, as there's enough here to get you interested and wondering exactly what's going on, without going too far to cause confusion. The world starts off bound to a very realistic portrayal of human interaction and people trying to get answers, even if you question if a character has some major issues with some of the stuff he or she pulls, which you will. I mean, I get that the main character is a journalist, and sometimes you have to push to get the scoop. But at one point, I was wondering if Cathy was going to kidnap someone to move along the plot. That does help, however, as her personal connection to the story helps blur that line between professional ethics and emotion, while still having a character fit the credible detective role. Character-wise, you've got a good collection here. There's a reasonable personality spectrum given the plot, and even characters who are a bit rough around the edges have elements that make them relatable. You've got the grumpy cop who's not very helpful at first, the housewife who's a little bit too snobby for her own good, and probably the best character of them all, the out-of-work actor hobo Goober, who has a touch of Rodney Dangerfield in his personality. But he's acted in some truly fascinating movies.
I'm not sure I want to know what Jacob's Bladder is about, but I'm gonna ask anyway.
Jacob's Bladder. The tragic story of Jacob Cobb, a schizophrenic man who forms an imaginary romantic relationship with his bladder. During long and joyful monologues on the can, he starts referring to his nether regions by the name of Jenny. Sadly, before Jacob has a chance to elope with his sweetheart, he gets committed to an asylum due to increasingly erratic behavior.
The game hits a lot of sensitive topics throughout its storyline. The biggest ones have to do with organized religion and mental disorders. And let's get this out of the way. If you're someone who's going to blow a gasket at critically talking about these subjects, Cathy Rain isn't right for you. They come right out of the gate and they don't stop. Granted, I myself have no problem with what they go for here, but that's a dehancer, and it'll come up during the scoring section of this review. The story is aimed for an older audience in my opinion, as it references things like Star Trek: The Next Generation. 80s and 90s kids will be more suited for the plot, and so this turns into another enhancer, as they will get the most out of the references and what Cathy Rain has to say. Some of the symbolism here may not be obvious at first, as some of the secondary scenes royally confused me until I started writing this video script and realized what they meant. On further review, this game may be worth a second playthrough just to understand everything that the game has set up in terms of early connecting symbolism. Think like a cheap version of an Edgar Wright film, and that's not a knock on the game, that's a compliment. It's nowhere near as detailed as something like Hot Fuzz, but I did get a nice moment or two when going through the footage and figuring out that they were alluding to something down the road. Oh, and of course, that's another enhancer. But the story does shift about halfway through the game, and it's hard to talk about it specifically without spoiling the plot. But for me, it caused problems at first with the transitional element of it, that the natural progression to get to the new plot points needed a bit more build-up and execution. It makes the third quarter of the game probably the weakest of the entire story, but the game does well in redeeming itself in its last quarter. That's where the build-up of the entire story does finally deliver, and it's able to incorporate not only the main storyline, but the small background details as well. However, I can't help but think that some story elements may have been left on the cutting room floor. Some backstory to Kathy is brought up at one point, with her complicated past with her parents, as well as some additional elements involving her grandfather. Several of those subplots aren't wrapped up on the game's conclusion, and I find myself disappointed that this world didn't give me the answers or closure I wanted. In general, I felt that the conclusion to the story was rushed, which stands out against the game's pace that kept rather consistent from the opening title. I'd put it slightly under the storytelling of games like Techno Babylon, but still a story that I enjoyed. It's more about me wanting more closure out of it more than anything else, and considering this may be a part of a series from what I can see why some questions were left open. Visually, the game once again reminds me of some of those old LucasArts titles, but is along the same lines of modern-day Wadjet games. It's not going to blow you away like Deponia, however, there's more than one way to skin a cat, and what it lacks in graphical fidelity, it makes up for in environment design. What I feel is the strength of the visuals isn't the visuals themselves, but the actual storytelling told within the presentation itself. Setting up dynamics of characters via the visuals start at the first scene, where you can tell the difference between Kathy and her roommate based on how clean their sides of the room are. The visuals themselves do a great job of telling what has happened to the town, from the broken down stress of the city to the lush forests covered in flowers. As to the voice acting, they've got some pretty good talent here for the various characters, and they do the job for the most part. Kathy herself started off poorly for me, as she had an annoying element to her voice. But that eventually died down, and she did a good job, in particular with the emotional parts of the story. Don't expect any performances that will transcend the script, but you also won't be remembering how bad any one character was either.
Well, let's get this over with then. How do you want your pictures? Shall I get some tubes to fill my face with? Will that suffice for your front page?
I'm no journalist. Well, not yet anyway.
But okay, what about the gameplay? Well, it's a point-and-click adventure, and it's your job to move the story along by solving the mystery like Velma from Scooby-Doo. You'll travel on your trusty Catmobile to the various locations, using your notebook to ask pointed questions and try to extract answers out of a variety of people. Point-and-click adventure-wise, the game is on the good, logical side of things. There's not a lot of red herrings here, and consistent logic helps when you need to find information regarding a place or a person. The game helps you out at times by graying out locations that you don't need to go, and most every item that you can interact with here is sizable and within plain sight. No Grim Fandango type insane logic here. However, you will get lost once in a while. I will say that despite the formula being rather standard, the implementation here does feel fresh at times. The use of items in non-conventional ways made a lot more sense here than in other games of the genre, and that the limits of logic weren't bending to make the mystery, but actually fit for what you needed it to do. The puzzles actually were a good challenge at times. They aren't overly complicated, the rules of them are usually right in front of you, and the game does a great job of giving clues to help you decipher what you need to do. There are moments where you'll need to step back and actually really think about things, as attempting to throw random answers at the wall won't give you what you need. With all that said, one or two puzzles and mysteries stretch things way too far. With the game's rules being bounded in the reality of the 1990s, there's one or two instances where the game throws you a curveball that really doesn't make a lot of sense. Okay, scanning a picture and manipulating the image brightness, I can buy that. Using the same scanner to import the audio? Okay, now I'm just confused. Options-wise, it sorta does suck that I can't set the resolution, as the game at full screen records in Shadowplay at 1280 by 720, similar to games like Techno Babylon. But one thing that bothered me more was the lack of options of an audio slider for the ambient sound. Now, I'll openly admit that part of it is the way I record. I like to put the game music as the background noise to these reviews. But it's a pretty standard option that bothers me that it isn't there. Luckily, there's no performance problems, but I would be concerned if there were any for a point-and-click game. Overall, Cathy Rain does hit some nice notes, as the game uses its simple presentation and good mystery elements to keep you entertained through the 6 to 8 hours it'll take you to beat. But a lack of some supporting storylines being closed out, as well as some awkward moments in both logic and story, puts Cathy Rain at a 72 out of 100. That means that for those who love the genre, it's worth the niche purchase, but for others, it's something to wait on until it goes on sale. But as always in my formal reviews, I have a set of enhancers. These are score modifications that you should make based on if you strongly put yourself in the enhancers category. These are there to adjust the score for more subjective parts of the game, which won't apply to everyone, but can help a title that may have been a tentative buy turn into a must buy, and vice versa. Either way, I feel like Cathy Rain hasn't finished telling her story, and that we may see more in the future from the guys over at Clifftop Games. I mean, the fact that the subtitle is A Detective is Born may be a clue in of itself. But I do want to see more from the young journalist with attitude, and here's hoping that we'll get more mystery in the near future. Thanks for watching. Like the video, share it with a friend, and subscribe if you want more content like this. In the description below, you'll find the Steam review accompanying this vid, along with social media that you can follow me on, Twitter, Google+, and Facebook groups. And if you want to support the channel, click that Patreon on the left of the screen. And remember, keep on gaming.